everyone, I'm Katie Wolfley, and today we're going to embark on a journey to understand and nurture our mental well-being and mental health. In our fast-paced world, mental health often takes a back seat, but it's as crucial as physical health. Today we focus on bringing it to the forefront, and we'll uncover the layers of mental health, discuss common challenges, and equip you with tools to enhance your mental well-being. It's important to note that this class serves as a resource for improving our mindfulness and well-being, but is not intended for self-diagnosis. For further help, please consult with a certified professional. As we navigate this session, please put any questions you have in the chat below, and we'll answer them in our live Q&A after this program. Without further ado, let's introduce our special guest and get started. Hey everyone, thank you for coming in tonight. I have here with me Patrick Green. He's the Program Director at Horizon Health Services. Thank you for coming, Patrick.
Thanks, Katie. Great to be here.
Thank you. What is it you do with Health Horizon Services?
Well, as a Program Director, I run one of the clinics. And so the clinic that I run, we have 14 counselors in my location. We treat a little over 1,000 patients in the community, mostly adult, and anywhere from anxiety and depression to schizophrenia.
Wow, yeah. Very nice. So obviously 1,000 patients, it's very common that we all have mental health conditions that we deal with, right?
Yes, yeah. It's interesting, when you're going through it, oftentimes folks will believe or feel like they're the only one. That this is something unique and that there is something unusual about them and that really nobody else is kind of experiencing or going through what they're going through. But in truth, the prevalence is much higher. Let me give you a context. So let's just say in Western New York, just in this area, if I were to give a free ticket to a Bills game, to anybody dealing with a mental health condition, we would sell out the stadium.
Wow.
And there would be a whole bunch of people like, wait, what about my ticket? And so being a generous person, I would give them a free ticket to the Sabres game. And we would sell out the arena. And we would still have people waiting to get in. In fact, we could do this 2 times over. That's how many people just in Western New York are dealing with some form of a mental health condition.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, basically what it means is that, you know, if you're dealing with something, you're not alone. You are just a human being.
Yeah, awesome. And what might be some of the common conditions that all amongst us within West New York are probably dealing with today?
Right. Well, there's some basic ones that we see quite a bit. You have depression symptoms, you have anxiety symptoms, you have forms of traumatic stress, and also grief and loss. And so those 4 categories are some of the most common that we see come through the doors.
Okay, and what might be some of the types of differences between them, most large that we could recognize?
Sure. So depression. Depression is not something that is your like normal ups and downs or your bad mood. Like we all have bad moods. That's kind of like pretty normal. Yeah. Depression is something much more pervasive. It is this powerful force that just is oppressive. One person kind of coined it this way, that it evaporates joy. That's depression, right? It's not something that you can power your way through, or you can muscle your way through, or try to kind of just gut it out or pretend like it's not there. It's something quite powerful that keeps people stuck. And that's depression. Anxiety is also something quite pervasive, where it can be a combination of somatic experiences and thoughts, and it all mixes together to make it incredibly difficult. Like the best way I could describe it, like any of you have ever had to public speak, and you were super nervous before you got up there, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. You're experiencing anxiousness. Now imagine for a moment you felt that level of anxiety when you first woke up in the morning, or you felt that type of anxiety or apprehension with the thought of going into the break room to get some coffee, right? That's anxiety, right? It's really powerful and very intense.
Oh. And then you said grief and loss?
Grief and loss and traumatic stress.
Traumatic stress.
So grief and loss, it's very interesting that grief and depression kind of overlap, but they're actually quite different. The way in which we heal from grief is actually through it. We actually have to experience grief in order to heal from it. Believe it or not, we're designed as humans to experience grief and to survive it. But it's intense and powerful. But a lot of the symptoms of grief are very similar to the symptoms of depression. And traumatic stress is probably its own, we could probably have our own conversation about traumatic stress. Yeah. But it's a whole bunch of different symptoms, somatic and thought and emotional, that are in response to something that might have happened. Like the definition I like to use of trauma is too much too soon, not enough for too long, or too much for too long, right? When those things are in place, our system usually will have some form of traumatic stress response. So things that you might associate with traumatic stress, like childhood abuse, a major vehicle accident, a natural disaster, some form of attack. Like these are big events, but they don't necessarily have to be the only things where a system has a trauma response. Like it would be normal when you're watching, the Bills play in the playoffs and they lose, right? That's going to be traumatic, and it's real and legit, right? But it's like on the continuum, it's over here, but it's a similar type of response that you would have with other things that are quite much more profound.
Yeah, yeah. And so it seems like you've kind of talked about like the body response, the mind response. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of science behind it.
Yes.
Can we talk about that?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Let's get into it.
A little science. All right, break out your pens and paper, right? There will be a test after this. So there is a system that we all have. We actually share it with the animal world, our threat response system. So it's designed to protect us. So we have to kind of go back in time to like back when we were still hunters and gatherers, right? We were not on top of the food chain. And so when we were out there looking for food or trying to protect, our clan, right? There were predators out there. They were bigger, faster, and stronger. So we needed a system in place to protect us, to alert us of danger or threat, and to marshal the energy in our bodies to fight or flee from threat. And that's something that all of us share with the rest of the animal world. Now that's normal, right? That's a normal response. It's something that we have. If you're walking down the street, for example, and then you see this angry dog running towards you, right? How might you feel?
Terrified.
Terrified, right? Even now, right? Terrified, right?
Yeah.
So your system is going through either a fight, flight, or freeze response, or a shutdown in response to direct threat. And that's a normal thing. What ends up happening when we talk about trauma or anxiety or depression or grief is that system gets hijacked. And so we end up getting stuck. We end up getting stuck into a constant state of threat analysis or a constant state of shutdown, where even the smallest things will elicit a really strong traumatic stress response. Like, for example, you might have experienced this just working with a colleague or a friend. Something minor happens, and then they like blow up, like just a huge response. You're like, what just happened, right? Like I just said we're out of coffee, and now you're like throwing things in the room, right? They don't match, right? What's going on is inside for that person, their level of stress has kind of risen to the point where they don't have any more room. And so they have an enormous response but it's in combination to all these other things that were piling up. So it's not the fact that we were out of coffee, but it was we were out of coffee and I'm dealing with financial stress and this is happening, relationship and worry and maybe physical health and all these other things. And that's the response you get.
Kind of like that mental cup is overflowing. Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
And here's the thing that ends up happening is that now this person has had this huge response, and you are going to respond to that instead of what's actually driving the pain. And guess what ends up happening? It just perpetuates the pain for that person. Now they feel even more isolated, more alone, more wrong, and there's greater disconnection between the two of you.
It's gotta be exhausting.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting for someone to be in pain.
Yeah.
It really is. And the thing is, you know, I like to use like the illustration of an iceberg. Like if you see an iceberg, you see the tip of the iceberg, but what do we know? Like most of the mass of the iceberg is below the surface. So that's the human condition, right? We don't see most of what's actually going on. And so we just see like behavior. But underneath it is all the pain and all the rest of the stuff that's going on. And we tend to respond just to the behavior and not to all like the rest of the story. And that creates more distress, more like lack of trust and more cynicism and skepticism and disconnection. And then someone's walking around the world just in this constant state of like looking for the next person to say something mean to them. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
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 It's oppressive. And then they get just worn down.
I kind of feel like sometimes like everybody has somewhere in their life where they felt like that iceberg, right?
Yeah, right.
So like,
Yeah.
if you're kind of feeling that way, right, then if we're thinking that phrase of like, you know, first step to think, you know, finding a solution to a problem is knowing that you have one. If I'm identifying with this iceberg, what are some things we could do to kind of start ourselves into working on our mental health?
Well, identifying it is such an important piece. When folks come in and I start working with them, one of the things I end up doing a lot of work at the beginning is talking about just the idea that they're human and this is normal. It's not going to feel normal for them, right? You know, if you're dealing with something, it's not going to feel normal. I totally acknowledge that. What I'm saying is the struggle, the distress is a normal part of being human. Here's the thing, if we fight it, we end up giving it more energy. So a lot of times we talk about this idea of you really have to start with acknowledgement and permission to be in struggle before you can even begin to do anything about it. You know, like for example, if I woke up this morning and I had fallen and I'd broken my leg, right? And what if I said to myself, well, I've got this important, you know, taping to do today. I don't have time for a broken leg. I'm just going to forget about it. Maybe tomorrow I'll deal with it, not today, right? And I come in here with a broken leg. How's that going to go, right?
Not very well.
No, it's going to be horrible, right? I'm going to be in pain. It's going to be totally awkward for you, right? And it's not going to work for anybody. And it's all because I'm ignoring the fact that I have a broken leg, right? I'm now in a state of suffering. But what do we do if we break a leg? What do we typically do? You go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Right? But there's a little piece in there that's super necessary that we kind of dismiss. Is that in order to go to the hospital, you have to acknowledge the fact that something just happened. Right? And we just take it for granted that's just what we do. Like, oh, I broke my leg, now I gotta go to the hospital. Right? That's the acceptance piece. That's the permission piece. And so in order to get to the hospital, you had to first acknowledge that you did something, right? But when it comes to psychological pain, emotional pain, we don't acknowledge it. We stuff it in, right? We just keep it inside. We don't acknowledge it. And then it's really difficult then to do anything. It's really difficult to even work on skills or talk to someone or do anything for yourself because we hadn't taken that step. So what I would say is the very first step, if you're feeling anything right now, is to, it's going to sound like opposite world, give yourself permission to be in struggle. That's step one.
Buffalo Rehab Group has my trust and vote of confidence. I highly recommend working with Katie at Buffalo Rehab Group. She is intelligent, uses care when working with me, and is very compassionate.
I've been working with Tyler Pacer from Buffalo Rehab Group since May. He's been very knowledgeable and easy to work with.
Kayla McClure makes PT feel more like a spa
Sean
day.
worked with me and got me back on
Kathy is warm and welcoming.
My physical
greeting
therapist is
everyone with
Savannah
Brandy was
Warner, and
kind,
she's smart as
compassionate.
I got my
I got my life
back
back at
I got my
BRG.
life back at Buffalo Rehab Group.
Are there some other thoughts on like maybe some practical techniques that in the context of within ourselves we could all start doing today
Yes.
to help with
Yeah,
this?
I do. I happen to have some skills that
Oh,
I can.
perfect. Knew I asked the right guy.
There are different types of skills. Let's start with a breathing one. So what I'll say is breath is something that is really fundamental. It's like a base that you really want to start with everything. Like some of you actually might be rolling your eyes right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, breathing, I've heard it 100 times. Please give me something that I can actually use. I'm going to let you know there's actually science behind why we focus on like a deep meditative breathing. There's a nerve, one of the cranial nerves. It's the vagus nerve. And this nerve, it's Latin for wanderer, because it kind of hits all of our major organs in our body. It goes everywhere. And it does a bunch of things, and it's super important. But one of the things it does is it helps to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is like the brakes. So if you have like the parasympathetic and you have the sympathetic. Sympathetic is the accelerator. Parasympathetic is the brakes, parachute, like slowing things down. So when your heart is racing, your mind is spinning, and you're just like, oh, I'm climbing the walls. You want to activate the part of your nervous system that slows things down. A meditative breath is going to hit that nerve that basically will do that biologically. Like you won't have any say in it. It's just going to do it on its own. So think of it like this. It's like pressing the calm button.
I like that.
So that's why we talk about breathing as like a foundation.
Cool, cool. So then, in my therapist brain, of course, right? There's a proper way to do breathing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Breathe with the belly rather than up
Right.
the chest.
Right. If you're breathing up here, that's where anxiety is. If someone scares you, it's up here. It's shallow breathing. So here's an exercise you can do just to get used to the belly breath, right? So you want to sit down and you kind of have your feet planted on the floor, and you want to try to breathe in with the diaphragm without your shoulders rising.
Okay.
Right? So you're going to breathe in through the nose, exhale through the mouth. And it's almost like the balloon is expanding, so that's your diaphragm, and then it's contracting. And so you're going to breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, belly expands, shoulders stay stationary.
Okay. Okay.
So breathe in, exhale. And when you exhale, you're kind of like almost like blowing up a balloon. That's kind of the movement you're making. So it's like this. And that's a belly breath.
Love that.
Yes.
Good strong abs too, right?
Right, it's great for the abs, right? It's good ab work. So you're also working on the washboard abs, right?
Perfect.
There it is. There it
I love
is.
my double duty.
So there are hundreds of different variations of breathing. You can look them up. You can do your own research. But really, what I would say is, and this is true of any skill, is that there are thousands of skills out there in order to help kind of reduce your anxiety or distress. The important piece is finding the skills that work for you practically, right? For some people, one breathing exercise works great. For somebody else, it's the worst thing for them ever, right? Totally normal, totally fine. We just kind of find what works and then throw away the rest.
Love it.
So this is called box breathing. And the reason why it's called box breathing is because we're going to breathe in, we're going to hold, we're going to exhale, we're going to hold, all for the same count. So if you, like 4 counts, for example. So you're going to breathe in for a count of 4, you're going to hold for a count of 4, you're going to exhale for a count of 4, you're going to hold for a count of 4, you're going to breathe in for a count of 4. So that's the box.
Going all the way around the edges of the box.
Right. And this is something that you can do anywhere, right? So that's the idea of like a skill if it's practical. Like say, for example, you're shopping, right? And you're at the line, it's long. Or let's say something worse. Let's say you're in like a 15 item or less line, and then the person in front of you has a shopping cart full of food.
Always.
Right?
Always.
Super annoying, right? It's going to really get our anxiety, our distress, our outrage up, right? And for some people, that's going to start the process. We're going to start spinning out. A breathing exercise in that moment can make all the difference. And so we're not talking about, getting cross-legged and, sitting on the floor being one with like the supermarket, right? That's not realistic. But you could be waiting in line doing a box breath, and by the time you get to the cashier, you're in a much different state.
I like that.
So we can try it if you want.
I'm up for it. Let's
All
do
right,
it.
Cool. All right, so I'll count off, and we'll do a count of 4. All right, so it's a belly breath. Right? And let's begin. Okay. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. That's it.
Very calming.
Very simple. Yeah. Nice.
And also a little kind of mentally challenging.
Yeah.
So I feel like it almost takes me out of the thought loop of
Yes.
what might be going on in front of me.
Totally. That's another thing, right? So distraction is another type of set of skills, but you're basically forcing your brain to think about something other than what you're distressed over. And it lowers the intensity. It's like if you ever cooked spaghetti, right? And sometimes it just kind of boils over the pot, right? If you take the pot off the flame, it lowers, right? Then you can put it back on the pot. So distraction is kind of like taking the pot off the flame, and then allows for something to change, and then you can resume whatever you're doing.
I like that. That's very good. What can we do maybe in a physical sense too? So we've got the thought change and all that jazz, but can we physically do something?
There are a couple things you could do. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
too.
Yeah. So you want to try a couple?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. We got to stand up for it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So this one is like a arm movement with a breath. So we're kind of combining a couple things. So I'll just do the arm movement first. So my arm's going to come up over my head, and then to heart center. And so that's just the arm movement. And then the breath is I'm going to breathe in through my nose, and then when I get up here, I'm going to exhale to here.
Okay.
And so,
Right.
so you want to try it?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay, breathe in. Yep. Breathe in. And that's it. Very simple, very basic, on purpose. The idea is with any skill, if it's simple and elementary, then it's repeatable. And that's what you want. It's really hard to do something complex when you're in a heightened state of distress. So you need something you can just kind of drop into without too much thought.
Gotcha. And then if I don't want to do that when I'm freaking out in Wegmans in my grocery line because it's so long, Is there something else I could do
Oh, you
for
don't wanna do this
physicality?
in the-
Well, you know. Only with my closest friends and family, maybe.
So there's one that you can do that's kind of like secret, type of movement, like nobody knows that you're doing it. And so it's kind of what we call progressive muscle relaxation. It's a variation of that. So basically what you're doing is you're tightening and you're releasing your muscles, right, with the breath. And so if I'm standing in line, tons of people, and I'm like getting anxious and angry, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm about to lose it, right? I'm just gonna do this. Breathe in. And then you could actually incorporate different muscle groups. So I can tighten my legs and then relax. I can kind of tighten my body if I want to. So it's less intrusive or conspicuous.
Yeah.
And it's something that can also help the body focus in, relax, and like get a little more flow in your system to kind of help the anxiety move out.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And so like these are things I can definitely practice in the moment, and we kind of talked about doing some of those like cognitive practices or even the compassionate pieces, things like that. I assume that there is with repetition, practice becomes a lot easier to do, right?
Yes. It's, are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
Okay, so if you had to write your name with your left hand, how would it go?
Oh, it would be terrible.
Yeah, right? In fact, try it, right? See what happens. Write your name with your non-dominant hand, right? Now, if you were to practice, or for some reason you couldn't use your right hand, and you had to write with your left, for 6 months, what would happen?
Probably get better at it, right?
Is the fact that you couldn't do it initially, is it because you don't know how to write your name?
No.
Right. It has to do with the fact that you're not used to it, right? Now, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel cumbersome, right, initially. It's not going to be smooth, and it's probably not going to go very well, right?
Right.
I do that exercise because it captures the common human experience of doing anything new, right? When we do something new, this is what we feel. It's awkward. It doesn't go well. Like in our mind, we do it this way, and then it comes out totally different, right? So how you get to that place where you think you feel like it's going smooth is through repetition, right? That's how we grow. That's how we move. That's how we change, is through repetition. Just like water dripping on a stone, right? Over time, it will actually change the surface of the stone. How does that happen? Repetition. Drop after drop after drop, right? But it takes time, right? So the laws of nature apply to us as well when it comes to change.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for skills? It means starting small, doing something that you can repeat, and that becomes the goal. Like when I work with a new patient, and we kind of go through skills, I talk about the first objective is just to practice. Whether they feel better or not is extra, right? Just get used to doing it. And so what I would say is pick something so small, only you know that you're doing it, and that's where you begin. And then you practice doing that over and over and over again. And what ends up happening is you build in layers, and then you just get better, more effective over time. And then before you know it, you'll be able to look back and say, oh my gosh, look how far I've come, right? How do you do that? Repetition, patience, permission.
And should we start these when we're in the middle of a fire, or should we start practicing these too in downtime?
Yes, great point. Practice when you don't need it, right? Start the skills when you don't need the skills. It's the best time to learn something new is when you're not in distress. So when you are in distress, your body almost remembers, right? It kind of knows it's what to do. It kind of goes into that muscle memory. That's what you want to get to. How do you do that? Practice when you're calm.
I like that. Seems much easier to do it then.
Right, exactly. What ends up happening is I'll go through a skill with a patient and they'll come back in, they're like, Pat, that didn't work at all. And then they tell me they tried to do it when it was like a 5-alarm fire. I'm like, well, of course. It was a 5-alarm fire and you're practicing something new. So you're doing something where you're feeling awkward in a moment where you're feeling horrible.
That's going to be a mess.
It's going to be really tough, right? But that's a normal thing. That's very human.
Yeah.
And so we just get used to doing it, and then over time, you'll have more intention, and you'll be able to kind of do it on purpose, where you're actually using the skill to feel better. That will happen.
And throughout that like practice period, as we're kind of struggling through it, which is good, right? We're working through it.
Yeah,
Struggle
yeah.
is good.
Yeah.
Don't expect ourselves to be good at it today, tomorrow, right? Like kind of give ourselves a little bit of grace.
Yeah, grace is such an important piece. You know, if you go to the gym and you work out one day, are you going to be able to go home, look in the mirror, and say, I've got washboard abs? Right?
If only.
If only, right? Oh my gosh, that'd be so great. But that doesn't happen, right? What happens? What do you need to do? Now, here's the amazing thing. Like, you could do something where you can physically change how your body looks. Like, you can change the physical structure of your body through an action. That is something that we're able to do, which is quite profound. But how do we do that?
Yeah.
Time, repetition, over and over and over again, right? Those rules apply to psychological and emotional change as well.
Awesome. So hopefully these are some great techniques you guys can take into your day and actually just start using now. Start practicing them now. Mm-hmm. And the more you get good at it, the easier it'll become to work it into everyday life.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we've learned a lot of information. We've learned a lot of unique tools and practices that we can do in daily life. I feel like it's an important thing to say that like we've given a lot of information, find what works for you and start small, build big.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important to remember that first, you're not alone, right? That it's not a unique thing, and that if you are struggling, you're not alone in it. And that there are a lot of different iterations of symptoms, but we see quite often depression, anxiety, traumatic stress, or grief and loss. And that these things are actually, pretty human. And there's a lot of biological and physiological reasons why we're feeling this way. And that's also pretty normal. And that doesn't make us weird or messed up. But it just makes us human. And because they're biological or physiological, they also respond to interventions. They respond to certain things. And that there are skills that you can use. The first step in doing any skill is to give yourself permission to be in struggle. Right? Step one. Step two is to practice some compassion. Compassion for others, compassion for yourself, and then drop in and try some skills. And the key is going small. Small, but repetition, right? And that leads to change. Small movements lead to big changes.
Yeah, our mental health is the journey, it's not the destination.
Exactly,
right?
That's exactly it, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us, Patrick. We appreciate you being here today.
I'm happy to be here. And, I would just like to end on this, that if at any point it's resonating for you that this is something that makes sense, that it's okay to take a next step and seek additional help or services. There's a lot out there, and if there's a little voice or there's something in you right now that's saying maybe I should, listen to that and take that step because help is available.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Stay tuned, guys. We're going to have our live Q&A section next. And I want to remind you, as a thank you for having you all participate and come today, we will be sending out an email in the following days that'll have a link for you to be able to try our Indie Reset program to help you work through mental health with a little bit of physicality to it. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back.
Do you feel like you're slowing down? Feeling older? Like you're out of routine and tired of being tired? Ready to get moving and take control of your health? Introducing Indie. We help everyday people move, exercise, and live an independent life. Indie provides safe, low-impact workouts designed by a team of physical therapists.
We're gonna work on balance, strength, and mobility. Get control of our pelvis. We wanna get control of that core.
Unlike other programs, you won't be left feeling exhausted, injured, or struggling to keep up. Get moving and improve your life today. Try for free. Visit indiemoves.com and get moving.
All right, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We are going to start with our live Q&A. But actually, before we get into that, I want to remind you all that after tonight's class, you will be emailed with a fabulous little code. It'll allow you to use our Indie exercise app for a month. It has great programs in it that are all designed by physical therapists for different body regions. And actually lately we've added in a group for yoga and as well as something called Reset to help you work on mental health strategies, wellness, and some light yoga that goes with it. So some great stuff in there. So look forward to that code and you'll be able to use it for a month. So before we get into the great questions you guys have already started asking us, we do want to say that if you or a loved one is struggling with mental health and you are looking for more beyond what you have been given today, we very much encourage you to reach out to Horizon Health Services. We're going to send it way to Pat and give a call. And I wanted Pat to be able to talk on what kind of services Horizons provides.
Great. Thank you. So Horizon is a community mental health agency. So we cover a broad spectrum of services. We work with children and adults. We have mental health services and substance use services. We do outpatient treatment. We also have residential treatment for substance use. We have regular outpatient care. We have intensive outpatient care. We have individual sessions, group sessions, medication management, medication assistant treatment. So we've got pretty much everything that there is when it comes to therapy services. So what I would say is, if you're not sure, right, if you don't know, just give us a call. We'll get you in, and from there, we'll figure out what's going to work the best, and then we'll kind of take them from there. It's very individualized for each person. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. So they're your BRG of mental health and wellness. So check them out. And then when you're broken your body, come to us, right? Okay. So our first question comes from Karen. Karen asks, what are some things we can do when we're feeling overwhelmed with what life is throwing at us?
Well, that's a really good question. Overwhelm is pretty intense. And typically what you can expect when you're overwhelmed is your system begins to shut down. Things just get so intense that everything kind of screeches to a halt. And then what ends up happening is everything becomes challenging. And the reason why I'm pointing this out first is that we often try to problem solve at that state. Like when we are in that state of overwhelm, we say to ourselves, I'm going to feel better once I get out of this jam, or once I kind of figure out how to deal with this problem. The challenge with that is we are so far away from where we need to be in our brain functioning that it's really difficult to problem solve. So the first thing to do when you're in that state of overwhelm is, it may sound like opposite world, but is to actually slow down, to pause, take a moment, take a breath. You want to allow your system to begin to kind of calm down a bit. So using some skills just to take a pause. Some of that pressure with overwhelm is trying to tell you, I got to get this done. I got to do all these different things. And then we just get locked up. So pausing may feel counterintuitive, but it's actually the most effective thing you can do in order to make a decision on what you need to do next. And there's lots of different approaches you can take in terms of understanding what's on your list. Sometimes writing it out, kind of detailing the things that you need to do. There's a particular decision-making process called decisional balance. And you kind of split it up into 4 quadrants. And you can decide on, for example, like the positives and negatives of doing something and the positives and negatives of not doing something. What I would say is if you're interested on that particular process, you can just go online and type in decisional balance worksheet and you'll get something. But the bottom line is once you've slowed down, then you begin the process of asking the question, what's the next thing I need to do right now? And that's the step you take. Using skills to help your system kind of stay in that state. And what I will tell you is it will probably take some time. And then you may have to come back, right? It may start, and then you will get a little way, and then you'll get overwhelmed again. Press pause, reset, go back. Press pause, reset, go back. And that's actually a very normal way of attending to overwhelm.
Awesome, very helpful. All right, our next question is from Janice. Janice says, can you please address sleeping concerns? Any tips for better sleep, which I'm sure we all could use, so lay it on us.
So sleep is vital to our health and well-being. It's really important, and when our body doesn't get the right sleep, things begin to kind of fall apart. It becomes really challenging, and so sleep is essential. So there are lots of reasons why sleep could be a challenge. It could be a result of certain habits. It could be a result of your mind going 100 miles an hour, and that when things are quiet is when the mind is the loudest. And if the thoughts are distressing or they're just coming back. In fact, this also is very much connected to overwhelm. So if you're in this state where your mind is buzzing and it is like something that you can kind of skate through the day because you're busy, you're doing things, you're continuing to be active and engaged, and then it comes time for sleep, and then boom, it just comes rushing in like a foghorn. Like you can't escape it. And that becomes really difficult. Then your system gets kind of in more of a heightened state, and then it becomes really difficult. The challenge is the harder you try to get to sleep, guess what happens? It's just the opposite, right? Yeah, it's so unfair. But there are some things you can do to help yourself. So one, some people find that white noise or some ambient sound in the background can be very effective. It can really help with racing thoughts or the mind going 100 miles an hour. Just that a little bit of distraction can keep the brain from totally focusing on the thoughts. Also, it's, if anyone's struggling with like tinnitus, for example, white noise can be a very helpful approach to kind of zeroing out or at least drowning out a little bit of that sound, so that allows you a little bit more of a break. So that's one thing that I would say. I would avoid the television. So anything that engages the brain is going to keep you awake. And so that's the other piece. And then other approaches that you can take to help with sleep is avoiding the phone, which may be easier said than done. But when you're on the screen, like the screen itself will activate the brain more. And so that actually puts you in a heightened state or more of a state of awake as opposed to sleep. And so do all those things before you lie down. When you lie down, that is when you're going to sleep. Allow that to happen. Give yourself permission to kind of separate those two activities. That can be very helpful as well. And then, there could be other medical reasons that could impact sleep. And so I would certainly recommend that if this is something that you're really concerned about, there's this like medical approach called ruling out. We want to rule out what could be happening. And so totally appropriate to talk to your doctor. There are sleep aids that are available. There are some, non-prescription, things that you can take as well. You can start with like chamomile tea, for example, can help calm things down. Or maybe get into a routine that kind of signals to your body, okay, I'm starting my sleep routine. And so you're almost kind of like training your system to get ready for sleep.
The physical therapist in me can't help but not also tell you if you're someone who frequently finds yourself falling to sleep and then all of a sudden, I gotta get up, I gotta go to the bathroom, stop drinking water and fluids maybe an hour or two before bed so you're not waking up and disrupting that process. Or making sure that you're simply getting physical activity in the day prepares your body for like, I'm tired, I need to get to sleep. So having some type of activity or maybe even doing a little bit before bedtime in a part of that bedtime routine might not be a bad idea either, right? Cool. All right. Karen wants to know, do we have any tips for letting go of anger? Oh, that's a good one.
Just a real simple question. Yes, okay. So first, I just want to acknowledge that anger is a real thing, and it's legitimate. One of what I've noticed for a lot of folks is, first and foremost, they're not giving themselves permission to be angry. And so actually the first thing that I would say, again, will seem like opposite world, is permission. Permission to be angry. Right? You have a right to it. Sometimes I'll tell patients this, and they'll kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? No one's ever said that before. That you have a right to be angry. And so that is the first thing that I would say. Oftentimes, a question like this there's like an underlying statement, which basically saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way. How do I get rid of it? And I take a bit of a different approach, which is I acknowledge that anger has a purpose. Anger is here for a reason. Anger is trying to tell you something. So instead of yelling at anger and saying, get out of here, I'm going to acknowledge that anger exists, and then I'm going to find a way to kind of move forward. The quote that I would use here is a quote that I use a lot for therapy, which is, peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but a sense of wholeness and security in the midst of strife. And so how does that apply here? It means that if you're angry, is there a way for you to move forward in the midst of the anger? Trying to get rid of it tends to give the anger more energy. So the first tip or the first step I would recommend is to acknowledge that you're feeling this way and almost say, I know that anger is here and it's just trying to tell me something. It's not here to disrupt me. So I am moving away from like this antagonistic relationship, and I'm trying to kind of understand it from a place of everything that my system is doing, the noble intention is to help me, not interfere or try to hurt me. There's always a noble intention behind whatever we're experiencing. And so if we can move into this place essentially of self-compassion, that allows for opportunities to find a way through it. So you might end up finding a place where you're kind of moving with anger as opposed to getting rid of anger. You might find a place where anger begins to diminish as you allow it to happen. Interesting study about these types of like emotions and feelings is that when you look at it, the research says the more you acknowledge it, the less intense it becomes. So it's similar to sleep. You know how much you want to try to sleep actually goes the opposite, right? It's the same thing here. The harder you try to get rid of anger, the more it comes up. And there could be reasons for the anger. And so I don't know your particular story, but that also has relevance in terms of why is it here? What's happening? And that could be tied to loss. It could be tied to so many different things. And all of it's real. So I would say in general, the first step in attending to anger is acknowledging that it exists and telling yourself you have a right to it. And then the next thing can happen. Oftentimes, this is something that can be done with a therapist. It might be helpful to talk to somebody else that can give you perspective to help understand where all this is coming from.
Awesome, thank you. And I feel like that would be a great strategy almost for most of our emotions, would it not? Kind of like that observational aspect?
Yes, 100%. We live in a society that often lifts up this idea of kind of powering through our distress, that we need to do it alone, or we need to not show weakness. And by showing weakness, it's by showing emotion or something that's impacting us. And I found that it's the exact opposite, that what builds resilience and strength is acknowledging the fact that we're human beings and that we are designed to feel. We were built this way. Just like we're built to breathe oxygen, we are built to feel. And it's something that is normal, and we have a right to it. And if we start from there, it really sets the stage for us to be able to attend to anything.
Thank you so much. Okay. Our last question. All these tips and exercises are great, but I feel like I don't have time. What can I do?
Well, that's a good question, right? Lots of ideas, and of course, everybody's busy, right? So that's a real thing as well. So the approach that I take with folks is what I call using micro movements. So basically, any change that we're doing requires time and consistency. There's this concept called neuroplasticity. So basically, it just means the brain is wired to be rewired. And how that happens, though, is in a particular way, that we need to do it over time on a consistent basis. I remember I took this one workshop by a neuroscientist, and she said that you can actually engage in brain-changing activity to the point where it will show up on a brain scan. Like you can change your brain structure, like how the pathways. So we have that ability. What is required is time and consistency. So if you're doing something that's like an hour every day, that might not be realistic. So what's not in that formula is how long. It's, are you doing this on a consistent basis, and are you doing it for a long period of time? The most effective way to do that is to find very small movements that you can do repeatedly, over and over and over again. So it's like this scaffolding or this kind of step process where maybe you start with 30 seconds, and then from there you go to a minute. And then from there, you go to a minute and a half. What you're doing, though, is you're building a foundation. And so, can you find 30 seconds in a day? Engage in a particular activity, a skill, something that's going to help your mental wellness. And then from there, do that for a period of time. And then build, and then build. A lot of times, just like, working out, we just want to dive in and go 100 miles an hour and then wonder what's happened like a couple months down the road because we've burnt out. Give yourself some grace and start small. Small changes lead to big things.
What a great answer. I love that. All right, so that actually finishes our questions. Thank you guys so much for showing up today and staying tuned for our Q&A. And I want to thank Patrick again for coming. It has been a fabulous time working with you. And we will see you guys next time.